Let me start with this. This is not a routine Patch Tuesday. What we are looking at right now is the number 113. That's how many vulnerabilities Microsoft just patched in January. And buried inside those 113 are 2 0 days. Not theoretical, not proof of concept, already exploited in the wild. This is the kind of update that tells us something important. Attackers were not just experimenting, they were operational. When vendors patch quietly, defenders fall behind quietly. And that's why this matters. This is not maintenance, this is Microsoft responding to pressure. And the real danger here is not the number itself, is what that number represents. Now, here's where we need to reset how we think about patching. Most people hear Patch Tuesday and think updates, reboots, inconvenience, but this update tells a very different story. Look at where these vulnerabilities live, not just applications, not just user space, but kernel, OS, core, Windows components, and Office. This is cross-layer exposure, remote code execution, privilege escalations, multiple paths, multiple entry points all at once. That doesn't happen by accident. Here's the angle most headlines miss. A high number of CVEs does not mean poor coding. It means attackers are getting better at finding weaknesses systematically and at scale. Discovery has therefore been optimized, and when discovery is optimized, exploitation follows. So this Patch Tuesday is not about fixing bugs, it's about responding to an attack surface under pressure. Which means from this point on, patching is not hygiene, it's actually incident response. As I said, out of 113 vulnerabilities, this is the one that should have your attention, the CVE 2026-2805. At first glance, it looks quite underwhelming. It's not a remote exploit, it doesn't get attackers in it by itself, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. This vulnerability lives inside the desktop window manager. The DWM is always running. It's trusted. It sits right at the boundary between user actions and the system itself. And this flow allows a local privilege escalation from standard user context to system level privileges. Let me be very clear about what that means. Once this exploit is used successfully, the attacker can disable endpoint security, access protected memory, dump credentials, establish persistence that survives reboots. This is not how attackers usually break in. This is how they take over. The reason why this vulnerability is already being exploited is because it's very reliable. It doesn't depend on exotic conditions, it doesn't crash the system, and it runs inside a component Windows implicitly trusts. That makes it ideal for real-world operations. And when a vulnerability like this is actively exploited, it tells us something quite uncomfortable, that attackers didn't just find it, they tested it. Now let's talk about how this plays out in the real world, because this is where most defenders actually underestimate the threat. The attack doesn't start here. It starts with something boring, a phishing email, a malicious attachment, a compromised browser session. The attacker already has a foothold. At that point, many organizations think we caught it early or the damage is limited. That's where CVE 2026-2805 comes in. This exploit is used after initial access. It's the pivot point. Once it fires, the attacker jumps from user-level nuisance to full system control. And here's the part that rarely makes headlines. Most of the damage in modern breaches happens after this step. This is where attackers basically turn off logging, extract credentials, move laterally, prepare ransomware or data exfiltration quietly and methodically. So when you hear local privilege escalations, don't think low impact, think force multiplier. This is how a small incident becomes a full-scale breach. If you are only measuring how attackers get in, you are missing where they actually win. At this point, it's also important to reset one more assumption. This is not just about hackers. What vulnerabilities like CVE 2026-2805 attract are different types of actors, each with very different motivations. First, advanced persistent threats. For them, this kind of exploit is actually perfect. It's quiet, it's reliable, and it allows long-term access without setting off alarms. This is how you pre-position inside networks, sometimes months before anything visibly happens. The second, cybercrime groups. They are not interested in this exploit by itself. They use it to increase the value of access. System-level control means higher ransom potential, better credential harvesting, cleaner lateral movement. And third, the group that rarely gets talked about, access brokers. These actors don't deploy ransomware, they don't steal data directly, they sell access. And the machine where this exploit has been used successfully is worth significantly more on underground markets. There's also a geopolitical dimension here, of course. Low noise Windows exploits like this one are extremely attractive because they offer deniability. No fireworks, no attribution-friendly chaos, just quiet, persistent control. This is not random cybercrime, this is cyber activity aligned with strategy. Now, here's the moment when things shift from security community concern to institutional alarm. This vulnerability was added to the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, the KEV. That list is maintained by the CISA, and that matters a lot. CISA does not add vulnerabilities to this catalog lightly. They don't just react to lab research, proof of concept, hypothetical impact. They react to confirmed real-world exploitation. Once a vulnerability lands there, US federal agencies are mandated to patch it. No debate, no delay. So when you see that designation, what it's really saying is this: attackers are already ahead. And the government agencies are being told to move immediately. Every organization, every other organization should be asking itself, what does my patch timeline look like right now? Because by the time a vulnerability reaches this point, the discovery phase is already over. The exploitation phase is already well underway. Up until now, this might still feel like an IT problem. Servers, endpoints, patch cycles, but this is where it stops being abstract. Because vulnerabilities like this don't just hit big enterprises, they ripple outward. Small businesses inherit risk from their service providers, managed service providers inherit risk from their tools, and supply chains quietly amplify everything. A hospital doesn't need to be directly targeted to be impacted by a Windows exploit. A remote worker doesn't need to click on something malicious to become the weak link. They just need to be connected. And there are costs here that never show up in breach reports. Cyber insurance premiums go up for everyone. Compliance requirements get tighter, even if you have done nothing wrong. And trust erodes quietly between partners, between customers, between organizations and the technology they depend on. This is how systemic risk builds. Not through one catastrophic failure, but through thousands of small compromises that never make the news. You don't have to be targeted to be affected. You just have to be part of the ecosystem. And now let's step back and look forward, because what matters most here is not just this vulnerability, it's what happens and what it represents. Exploits are becoming operational within days, not months. AI-assisted tooling is reducing the skill barrier for attackers, chaining vulnerabilities faster than defenders can respond. And perhaps most importantly, attackers are learning to exploit time. Patch windows, change freezes, human fatigue, these are now part of the attack surface. Attackers are not just optimizing for vulnerabilities anymore. They are optimizing for delay. That means the future of defense is not about perfect prevention. It's about speed, prioritization, and assuming compromise happens faster than we'd like. Organizations that understand this will be able to adapt. Those that don't will keep reacting just a little too late. The race is not to find every vulnerability, it's to respond faster than attackers expect. So let's now bring this together. This Patch Tuesday was not just about fixing bugs. It was a signal that exploitation is faster, quieter, and more systematic than ever. A signal that patching is no longer a background task, it's a strategic decision. We have seen an actively exploited zero-day, a privileged escalation flaw designed for persistence, multiple actor types from criminal to state-aligned groups, and a response serious enough to trigger government mandates. None of that is accidental. In 2026, security failures don't just start with a breach. They start with a delay. A delay to patch, a delay to prioritize, a delay to believe it could happen to you. So if you made it this far, thank you so much. This was System Fracture, where we look at cybersecurity not as isolated incidents, but as signals of deeper structural change. If this kind of analysis helps you think differently about security, please consider subscribing to the Daily Signal. And if you want more breakdown like this, check out the rest of the System Fracture playlist. It's linked right here. Stay curious, stay ahead. I'm Max, Point Break Security, and I'll see you in the next briefing.